It all started with a dream. Not one of those weird, random dreams that you forget the minute you wake up, but the kind that feels so real it lingers long after your eyes open. This one haunted me for days. I woke up from it one night, gasping for air, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest like I'd just run a marathon. In that dream, Mira, my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was standing in a field of broken glass. Her red dress, the one I had gotten her for our anniversary last year, was vibrant against the dull, jagged shards around her, the fabric almost glowing in the eerie light. She looked beautiful, just like she always did, but the smile on her face? It wasn't for me. It wasn't even close. She was smiling at someone behind her, someone I couldn't see, but they were there, and the way she looked at them, God, it felt wrong. And then, behind her, this shadowy figure appeared. Tall, dark, towering over her, like he was waiting to pounce. His face was hidden, but his grip on her shoulder was unmistakable. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was possessive, like he had every right to be there, like he owned her. I woke up in a cold sweat. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe, and my mind was spinning. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, just my subconscious making up weird stories, but something inside me told me that it wasn't. Something felt off, like that dream was trying to show me something I wasn't seeing with my eyes. 4 days after that, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every morning, Mira would go about her usual routine. She'd get up early, like always, and make coffee. I'd smell it before I even opened my eyes, and I'd hear her humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. It was comforting, familiar, but every time I saw her, I couldn't stop thinking about that dream. That nagging sense that something wasn't right. I tried to push it aside, tried to ignore it. Maybe it was nothing, just a weird, vivid dream. But the more I thought about it, the harder it was to shake off. It was like the dream had planted a seed of doubt in me, and now it was growing. One morning, I tried to brush it off. Mira was making her usual cup of coffee, the steam rising from the mug in delicate swirls. She was humming that little tune she always did while she worked, the same one she'd been humming for years. Her smile was the same too, warm, reassuring, like she had nothing to hide. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked with a playful grin as I stared at her, zoning out. "You look like you're solving a big mystery." "Just had a weird dream," I said, forcing a smile and trying to make it sound like nothing. "No big deal. Probably just one of those random things your brain does when you sleep." She chuckled, shaking her head as she poured the coffee. "Well, if you're trying to tell me you dreamt of some mystical being or something, I'll have to start getting worried," she teased, handing me my cup. "Maybe I should be worried about you," I said, taking a sip, pretending to lighten the mood. She laughed, shaking her head again. "I'm fine. You know me, just a regular morning routine." I nodded, trying to act like I believed her, but deep down, that feeling hadn't gone away. It was still there, gnawing at me, quietly telling me that something was wrong. I didn't know what it was yet, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I had no idea how bad it was going to get. I tried to keep going like everything was fine. I really did. I mean, life had been good for us, right? Mira and I had our ups and downs, sure, but every couple does. But that feeling, the one from the dream, it didn't let go. It stuck with me, almost like an itch I couldn't scratch. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid, that I was overthinking it, but the little things, the small shifts in her behavior, started piling up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was subtle at first. Just little things that didn't add up. Like how Mira started spending more time on her phone. She always had her phone on her, of course, but lately, she'd be glued to it for longer stretches, tapping away at it while we ate dinner, or scrolling through it while we watched TV. It wasn't like her. When we'd talk, she'd be distracted, glancing at the screen every few seconds, her fingers moving in rapid succession. At first, I thought maybe she was just busy, work stuff, friends, whatever. But then I noticed how quickly she'd lock her phone when I walked by, like she was trying to hide something. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt like she was avoiding me. Then there were the times she'd go out with friends, or in one case, a work event. I mean, I never had a problem with her hanging out with her friends, but it was starting to feel like she was always out, always somewhere else, always busy. There was one night she came home late, her eyes a little too wide, her smile a little too forced, as if she'd been caught in something. Work dinner, she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But something about it didn't sit right with me. We had a babysitter lined up for Lucas, but she came home hours later than expected. I didn't make a big deal about it, but the whole thing felt off. And then, there was the day it all started to unravel. It was a Tuesday, middle of the afternoon. I had an unexpected client cancel on me, so I figured I'd get home early for a change. I thought maybe we could spend some time together, have a quiet afternoon, maybe talk for once. But when I walked into the house, it was unnervingly quiet. No sound of Lucas running around, no Myra's usual hums or chatter filling the air. Just silence. I called out her name, half expecting to hear her say something from the kitchen or from the living room. But no answer. So I walked through the house, calling again, and that's when I heard it. A laugh. A soft, playful laugh, coming from the kitchen. But it wasn't her usual laugh. Mira had this way of laughing that made everything feel lighter, but this wasn't that laugh. It sounded different. Almost nervous. And there was something else in it, like a layer of sweetness that didn't belong. I stood there for a second, just listening. It didn't make sense. She was alone, right? It wasn't like she had anyone over. So why was she laughing like that? I took a deep breath and walked toward the kitchen. When I stepped inside, there she was, standing by the counter with a glass of red wine in her hand. At 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mira didn't drink during the day, never had. She wasn't the type to crack open a bottle of wine when the sun was still high in the sky. In fact, she usually avoided alcohol during the week, saying she didn't want to feel sluggish or waste the day. But there she was, swirling her wine glass, a soft smile on her face. She didn't even seem surprised to see me. I tried to mask the suspicion rising inside of me, but I couldn't help it. Surprise, I said, trying to sound casual, like I wasn't freaking out on the inside. What's the occasion? A little early for wine, don't you think? Her eyes darted to her phone, which was lying on the counter beside her. For just a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Panic? Guilt? I couldn't tell. She quickly grabbed the phone, as if it was a reflex, like she was trying to hide it. Oh, it's nothing, she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. Just had a rough day, Needed a little me time. She laughed lightly, almost like she was trying to convince herself more than me. But I knew something was off. That wasn't like her. Mira didn't drink in the afternoon, and she didn't use rough day as an excuse for anything. I didn't say anything more, didn't push her, yet. I just smiled and nodded, taking a mental note of everything. The unease in my gut was growing, and it wasn't going anywhere. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. Something was breaking, and I wasn't sure what it was or how deep it went. But I was starting to realize that Mira had secrets. Big ones. Secrets that were about to come crashing into my life. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Everything seemed normal on the surface. Mira still did her usual things, still laughed at my bad jokes, still kissed me goodbye every morning, but underneath it all, something felt off. I was starting to feel like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to ignore the nagging, gut-wrenching feeling that something was wrong. The weirdness with her phone and the afternoon wine kept eating away at me. But I didn't have proof of anything. I couldn't just accuse her, right? I mean, what if I was wrong? What if I was just overthinking everything? Then, one Saturday night, things escalated. Mira had been out late the night before, supposedly at a work dinner with some of her colleagues. I didn't press it, but I didn't like the way she'd come home. Her eyes were a little too wide, like she was trying to hide something, and her smile was a little too forced. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but that gut feeling was getting stronger. So, while she was getting ready to leave the next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I snooped. I know, it's not a proud moment. But I couldn't help myself. There was just too much hanging in the air, and I couldn't live with the doubt anymore. Mira had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she took a shower, and I felt like I had no choice. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, my stomach twisting with guilt, but I opened it anyway. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. Myra's messages were a labyrinth of lies. There were texts to Kelly, Whoever the hell that was, ranging from cryptic to straight-up flirtatious. One thread stood out. Can't wait to see you again tonight. Miss you more than you know. Another text said, the house is all yours tonight. Don't forget the wine, winky face. I felt the blood drain from my face. What the hell was this? I scrolled through more messages, my mind racing. I had no idea who Kelly was, but whoever they were, it was clear that Mira was hiding something. I couldn't stop myself. I kept digging. I opened her calendar app, hoping for something to make sense of it all. And there it was, a series of mysterious appointments marked as personal with no details. But the timing was what really caught my eye. The dates lined up perfectly with the nights Mira claimed to be busy with work, or out with her friends. It was all starting to make sense now, too much sense. And the more I found, the worse it got. Mira had been lying to me. She wasn't just spending time with friends or colleagues. She was seeing someone else. Someone who wasn't me. I couldn't keep my hands from shaking. The betrayal was starting to feel like it was suffocating me, like I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't stop looking. I found more. A deleted email to Kelly. This time, it was about a restaurant reservation, confirming a dinner date. I couldn't believe it. She had planned it. Planned to meet this person while I stayed home thinking everything was fine. When Mira came out of the shower, I quickly put the phone back, my mind racing 100 miles a minute. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my cool. At least on the outside. I didn't confront her right away. I didn't want to make a scene or let her know I knew. I didn't want her to get the satisfaction of thinking she was winning. But the truth was there, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Mira wasn't just sneaking around. She was betraying me, us, in the worst possible way. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. The next few days were a blur. Mira went on with her life like nothing had changed. She was back to her usual routines, but every time I looked at her, I saw her differently. I saw the lies in her eyes. I saw the person who was not the woman I married. She was someone else entirely. And as much as it hurt to admit it, I realized that I wasn't the one she wanted anymore. One night, she casually mentioned that she was going out again, this time with her best friend, Kayla. We're doing a spa day, she said, slipping into a sundress and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. It was the same story as always, girls' day out or work event. And again, I felt that same unease creeping in. Something wasn't right. I decided to follow her. I knew it was crazy. I knew it wasn't the kind of thing a husband should have to do, but I had to know. I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. So, as soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her out. My heart was in my throat, but I didn't care. I was going to find out the truth, no matter what. I drove a few blocks behind her, watching her car turn onto a street I didn't recognize. She parked outside a trendy bar, not a spa, not Kayla's place. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach. Mira, at a bar, in the middle of the day? That wasn't like her. I pulled into a parking spot across the street and waited. My hands were sweating, my mind racing. A few minutes later, I saw Mira step out of her car. She adjusted her dress, looking around, and then he showed up. Tall, dark-haired, sharply dressed. Too confident. I felt sick. I watched them walk into the bar together, laughing like they had all the time in the world. But it was the way Mira looked at him, the way she laughed. That was the moment I knew. They were more than just friends. And that kiss they shared? I felt it in my bones. The same kiss she used to give me, the one that always made me feel like I was her world. Now she was giving it to him. My phone slipped from my hand, hitting the ground with a loud thud as I stood there, frozen. Mira turned, eyes scanning the street, and then she saw me. The shock was instant, but it quickly turned to something else. Something cold. Something defensive. She walked toward me, and I could see the panic in her eyes, but there was something else too. It was like she was ready for a confrontation, like she'd been expecting this moment for a while. I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, my chest tight, my mind numb. She was standing in front of me now. Shame, or was it anger, painted across her face? I didn't care. All I could think was that she had done this, and now she was going to face it. There was a moment when time just seemed to freeze. Mira stood there in front of me, a few feet away, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. For a second, I wondered if she was going to say something. Try to lie, maybe throw some excuse at me, something that would make all of this disappear. But she didn't. Instead, her face twisted into something defiant. It wasn't the kind of guilt or shame I expected to see. No, it was almost like she was bracing herself for this moment, like she knew this day was coming, and she was ready for it. Her voice came out low but steady. "What do you think you're doing?" The question hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't even have to say anything. She already knew, didn't she? She knew I'd been following her, knew I had seen her with him. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I wasn't sure what to say. How do you even begin to confront the person you've spent years with, the person you trusted with everything, knowing they've been lying to your face all along? Instead, I just stared at her. My anger wasn't even the first thing that hit me. It was the betrayal. The sheer weight of it, the realization that the woman I'd spent so many years with wasn't who I thought she was. And maybe she never was. She stood there, her arms crossed, eyes flicking nervously toward the man she'd been with just moments before. He was still standing by the bar, watching us from a distance. I wanted to scream, wanted to run over there and punch him in the face, but I stayed rooted in place. He wasn't the one I was angry with. No, Mira had done this. Mira had been the one to lie, to deceive, to betray everything we built together. I finally found my voice. "Who the hell is he, Mira?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed, almost like she was exhausted. "His name's Ryan," she said, her tone casual, like it was no big deal. She might as well have been telling me the weather. "Ryan," I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around it. "You've been seeing him, behind my back? For how long?" Myra's gaze shifted again, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she rubbed her temple like she was tired of this conversation, like she'd been carrying this secret for far too long. Her lips parted, but she didn't say anything for a beat, like she was calculating her next move. I could see the wheels turning in her head, probably trying to decide how best to lie her way out of this. But I wasn't giving her that chance anymore. "I want the truth," I said, my voice a little louder than I meant. I could feel the anger rising in me now, but it was mixed with disbelief. "All of it. How long? How many times? Was this just some casual thing, or was I the fool this whole time?" She took a step back, clearly unsettled by the way I was looking at her. For a second, she almost seemed human again, vulnerable, like the Mira I once knew. I wanted to feel bad for her. I wanted to give her a chance to explain herself. But then I remembered everything. The late nights, the lies, the secrets, the strange behavior. I remembered how she used to tell me everything, how we used to be able to talk about anything and everything. And now I didn't even recognize her. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice quieter now, almost like she was trying to make me feel sorry for her. "I never meant for it to happen. It just did. I didn't plan for this, okay? It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I repeated, scoffing. "You've been lying to me for months, Mira. You've been sneaking around, making up excuses, all while I was at home. I was the one who thought everything was fine. And now you're telling me it's not what I think." Her face faltered for a moment. "I didn't know how to end it," she said, and this time, there was a touch of panic in her voice. "I didn't know how to tell you, how to hurt you. I thought if I just kept it a secret, everything would be okay." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "You thought you could just keep lying and everything would be fine? You thought you could have him and me, all at the same time?" She took another step back, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but I wasn't done. "I couldn't be. You don't get to do that, Mira. You don't get to tear everything down and then play the victim. I'm not the one who's been lying." Mira opened her mouth to say something, but then she stopped herself. She knew I was right. She knew she couldn't spin this any other way. And that's when I felt it, a small sense of relief, almost like a weight lifting from my chest. For the first time in days, I wasn't just stewing in the unknown. I had the truth. And no matter how badly it hurt, no matter how much it cut, I was done living in the dark. "I'll be leaving soon," she said after a long pause. Her voice had softened, but I could tell she wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to beg for forgiveness. No, Mira wasn't the type for that. She just wanted everything to go back to how it was before, with no consequences. But that wasn't going to happen. "Don't come home," I said, my voice firm. "You've made your choice." Her face dropped, a flash of something, regret, maybe, flashed in her eyes, but it didn't last long. In the next moment, the defiance was back, like she was trying to convince herself that she wasn't the one who had messed up. "Fine," she said, her tone biting. "I'll go. But don't expect me to feel sorry for you." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back toward Ryan, who was still watching us from the bar. She glanced at him for a moment, her expression shifting from guilt to something else, something unreadable. As she walked away, I felt a strange numbness wash over me. I wanted to yell, to scream at her, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, watching her leave, knowing it was over. This was it. The end of something I'd spent years building. The end of the woman I once thought was my soulmate. But now, I could only think about what came next. What was I supposed to do? How did I move on from this? How could I let go of someone who had hurt me this much? I wasn't sure yet, but one thing was clear: Mira was gone. And I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces anymore. The days after that confrontation felt like walking through a haze. Mira was gone. Just like that. She didn't fight it, didn't try to come back, not even a single apology. It was almost as if everything had been planned in some way, like she'd been waiting for that moment, for me to figure it out. I thought I'd feel a sense of relief, maybe even triumph, but there was no victory in it, just emptiness. I remember the first night alone. The house felt too quiet, too still. The silence was deafening. I could almost hear the echo of our conversations, the laughter we used to share, bouncing off the walls. I sat in the living room, staring at the spot on the couch where Mira used to sit, flipping through old photos on my phone. I saw pictures of Lucas, our son, smiling wide, his little arms wrapped around both of us. I thought about how happy we once were, how I used to believe that nothing could break us. But here I was, alone. And yet, even with the crushing weight of it all, I felt something stir in me. Something dark. Something that had been simmering beneath the surface. Anger. Not just anger at Mira, but at myself. How could I have been so blind? How did I miss it all? How did I miss her? It was a week after the confrontation when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Mira just walk away and live her life without facing any consequences. I had a lot of pride, too much maybe. But the thought of her moving on, leaving me in the dust, without any repercussions, was unbearable. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to just confront her. I wasn't going to sit back and let her destroy everything and get away with it. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to lose everything, like she had done to me. I started by looking for the guy, Ryan. I didn't even know where to start, but I couldn't just sit here doing nothing. I was angry, heartbroken, and desperate for some form of justice. I searched for his name online, trying to find any scrap of information I could use. It didn't take long. I found a social media profile that seemed to match, and after a few clicks, I had a full name and a face to go with it. Ryan, probably in his early 30s, clean-cut, wearing a suit, looking smug as hell in his photos. Like he didn't have a care in the world. He had no idea who I was, but I knew everything about him now. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it, either. The first thing I did was send him a message. I didn't threaten him, didn't make a scene. I was calm, cool, calculated. I know what you've been doing with my wife. Stay away from her, or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him think twice. I didn't care if he was scared, honestly. He deserved to be. After that, I took a different approach. I started telling people, subtly of course, about Mira and Ryan. At first, I didn't come out with the full truth. I didn't need to. All I needed to do was plant the seed of doubt. I told a few of Myra's friends that I'd seen her out with someone that night, that she'd been acting strange lately. I didn't mention Ryan by name at first, but I let the rumors swirl, and I watched as they took root. It wasn't much, but I could see the cracks forming. Then, I hit her where it would hurt the most. Kayla. Her best friend. The one she had always confided in. The one person I was sure Mira had told everything to. I had to go there. I found Kayla's number from an old group text and sent her a message. It wasn't anything wild. I didn't want to go overboard, but I did want her to know the truth. I don't know how to say this, but Myra's been seeing someone else. She's been lying to you. I just thought you should know. I didn't say too much. I didn't need to. I just needed Kayla to know the truth. And once she did, there was no turning back. The next day, Kayla reached out to me. Her message was a mix of disbelief and anger. She didn't want to believe it at first, but once she processed it, she couldn't hide it anymore. I could see it in her responses. She was pissed. She felt betrayed too, and I didn't blame her. She had no idea Mira had been living a double life. A few days later, Kayla confronted Mira. I knew it would be messy, and I knew it would hurt Mira more than anything I could do. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about us, our family, the people she had lied to and manipulated, and the person she had destroyed. She needed to face the consequences. I didn't have to be there when it happened. Mira didn't know it, but Kayla had already started distancing herself. Her circle was shrinking. The people who had once been in her corner were now starting to see her for who she really was. It was like watching a house of cards slowly tumble down. Mira came home one afternoon, looking more frustrated than I'd ever seen her. She slammed the door behind her and walked into the kitchen, but the anger in her eyes wasn't directed at me, it was at herself. She didn't even have to say anything. I knew she had found out that the walls were closing in. The people she thought were on her side were starting to pull away. You told Kayla, didn't you? She spat, her voice low but sharp. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to act smug, but I held it in. There was no need for that. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us, letting her realize what she had done. I didn't have to, I finally said, my voice cold. The truth's out. You're not fooling anyone anymore. Myra's face twisted with rage, but I could see something else in her eyes too. Fear. For the first time since I'd caught her, I saw it. She knew it was over. You think you've won, she sneered, crossing her arms. I didn't say anything, but my eyes were hard as steel. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on her. She had destroyed everything, and now she was left with nothing. As I stood there, watching her unravel, I realized something. I wasn't just taking revenge on her. I was taking back my life. And that was something she could never take away. It's strange, but after Myra's confrontation with Kayla, everything started to feel real. Like I was watching the life I'd built with her fall apart, piece by piece, in slow motion. And I wasn't even sure how to feel about it. One part of me was relieved. Finally, the truth was out, and I didn't have to live in the fog of uncertainty anymore. But the other part, the part that had been married to Mira for so long, that part felt hollow, like a ghost had taken her place, and I was left picking up the pieces of the person I used to know. The following days were a blur of messages, calls, and angry confrontations. But the worst part was seeing how quickly people started to turn on her. It wasn't just Kayla and our friends anymore. Our whole social circle seemed to shrink. Everyone who had once trusted her, confided in her, started to pull away. I could tell she was fighting it, putting on the act like everything was still fine, but you can only fake confidence for so long. The truth had a way of bleeding through every crack. It wasn't long before I started to notice the small things. The way Mira would glance at her phone nervously, the way she'd stare at the front door like she was waiting for someone to come by. She was no longer in control of the narrative. It was like a weight was pressing down on her, and she didn't know how to escape it. I never said a word about it. Why would I? Mira had no one to blame but herself. She had brought this on. But there was something oddly satisfying about watching her squirm, watching her try to repair the damage she had done. And yet, there was still this part of me that wasn't fully satisfied. It wasn't enough. I had to make sure she paid for every single lie, every single betrayal. It was one evening, about a week after everything had blown up, when I saw the real cracks in her armor. Mira was pacing back and forth in the living room, her phone in her hand, eyes glued to the screen. The tension in the air was suffocating. Lucas was asleep, thank God, so at least I didn't have to worry about him walking in on whatever storm was about to hit. I walked into the kitchen, pretending to grab something out of the fridge, and just watched her for a moment. She didn't even notice me. Her voice was shaky as she muttered under her breath, "What do I do now?" She wasn't talking to me, but I still heard her. I wasn't sure what she was expecting. Maybe someone to swoop in and save her? Maybe she thought I was just going to forgive her and let everything go back to how it was before. The thought made me sick. Finally, she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a second, I thought she might break down. She didn't. Instead, her face hardened, and she tried to play it off like nothing was wrong. She forced a smile and tossed her phone on the counter. "I need a break." I didn't respond. Instead, I just stared at her. She shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting me to remain silent. "A break," I repeated, my voice low. "You've had your break, Mira. You've been breaking everything for months." She flinched at the sharpness in my voice. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her own defenses, and I realized she was terrified. She was trying to keep it together, but the facade was crumbling. She knew it. I knew it. And now, I wasn't going to let her hide behind any more lies. "You thought you could play both sides, didn't you?" I continued, stepping closer. "You thought I wouldn't find out. That you could just sleep with someone else and keep me in the dark like I was some kind of fool." Her eyes flicked nervously toward the phone again, but she didn't reach for it this time. Instead, she crossed her arms and shrugged, trying to act casual. But there was nothing casual about it. The lies, the deceit, it was all catching up to her. "I never wanted to hurt you," she muttered, but I could hear the faint tremor in her voice. She wasn't convincing anyone, especially not me. "Well, you did," I said. "You've hurt me, and you've hurt Lucas. And now, you're just pretending like nothing's wrong." Her lips parted like she was going to say something, but the words didn't come. It was like she knew that she had no ground to stand on anymore. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, almost as if she was talking to herself now. "I thought I could fix it. I thought—" "Fix it?" I cut her off, my voice hard. "How do you fix something you've broken so badly? You can't. You can't just erase what you've done. And you definitely can't fix this by pretending it's not happening." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in days, and for a split second, I thought I saw something else in her eyes. Something like regret. But it was gone before I could even register it. "Maybe you should leave," I said, finally breaking the silence. "Maybe it's time for both of us to move on. This isn't working anymore." Her face twisted in shock. "You want me to leave?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "After everything we've been through? After everything you've done," I corrected her. "Yeah. I think it's time." For a second, I thought she might break down, cry, beg me to take her back. I almost braced for it. But no, she didn't. Instead, she stood there, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen her. I could tell she was trying to hold it together, but there was no real fight left in her. The woman I had once loved was already gone. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. I watched her go, feeling something cold and final in my chest. It was over. For good. The house felt emptier than ever, but there was something else too. Something like freedom. It wasn't the relief I expected, but it was something. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. Or maybe it was just the end of everything I thought I knew. The days that followed Myra's departure felt like a blur. It wasn't like I was happy about it. No part of me was happy, but the absence of her presence left a strange stillness, a kind of quiet that I wasn't used to. It was like the air had cleared. There were no more lies to untangle, no more double lives to uncover. It was just me. And that was exactly what I needed. But there was still the sting, the way she'd betrayed me, the way she'd betrayed our son, the way she'd torn apart everything we had. I had spent the last few weeks not only processing that betrayal, but deciding what I was going to do about it. I wasn't going to sit back and let her destroy everything we had built without any consequence. That night, after she left, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey, pouring myself a drink. It wasn't to drown my sorrows, not exactly. It was more like a ritual, an act of shedding the weight of the past, of facing down the ghosts of my marriage. I didn't want to forget what had happened. I wanted to remember. I needed to feel every bit of it, because I wasn't going to let her get away with anything. I had already started my plan. I'd called Ryan, the guy she'd been seeing behind my back. I didn't threaten him directly, but I let him know that I knew about him, that I had pictures, that I had proof of what he had done. I made it clear that if he ever tried to get close to Mira again, there would be consequences. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to shake him up. But that wasn't enough for me. Not by a long shot. I needed to take this further. Mira had always been about appearances, always trying to put on the perfect act, the perfect life for everyone around her. She had crafted an image of who she was, but that image wasn't real. It was all a lie. So, I decided it was time for everyone else to see that. I started with her friends. Kayla, especially. She'd known everything about Myra's affair, and yet she had still stood by her, defended her. I sent Kayla an anonymous message, telling her everything I knew about Myra's affair with Ryan, about all the lies Mira had told her, about the time she'd said she was working late or meeting clients, when she was actually sneaking off with another man. I didn't have to tell Kayla everything, but I told her enough. The next day, Kayla called me. She was furious. Not at me, but at Mira. She didn't want to believe the truth at first, but once the seed had been planted, there was no going back. I could hear her voice shaking with anger as she raked Mira over the coals. "How could you do this to him?" she asked her. "After everything?" Mira didn't have an answer. I knew that much. But what really hit me was when I saw how quickly people started to distance themselves from her. It wasn't just Kayla anymore. It was everyone. Her colleagues, her friends, people we had shared dinners with, gone on vacations with. One by one, they all started to drop off, started to look at her differently. No one was buying the act anymore. And as much as it hurt, as much as I wanted to feel guilty for ruining her life, part of me didn't care. She had destroyed mine. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my family, and now it was her turn to feel the pain. But what hit me hardest was when I ran into her mother at the grocery store. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and I'll admit, I didn't expect her to turn on Mira. I really didn't. I thought she would defend her, just like she always did when Mira made mistakes. But instead, her mother looked at me with something close to pity in her eyes. "I heard about what happened with Mira," she said softly, her voice wavering. I just don't know what to say." I tried to keep my composure, but her words hit like a punch to the gut. She didn't ask me how I was doing, or if I was okay. She didn't offer any comfort. She just knew. She knew the truth. And in that moment, I felt this deep, aching emptiness, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss. All the lies, all the pretending, had been for nothing. And now everyone knew. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "She's my daughter, but I never wanted this for you. Never." That was when it really hit me. I wasn't just avenging myself anymore. I was avenging Lucas, too. This wasn't just about what Mira had done to me. She had done it to our son, to the family we had built. And now she was paying the price. I didn't say much to her mother. I just nodded and walked away, feeling this odd sense of finality, like I was leaving behind a version of myself that I couldn't get back. When I got home, I sat down on the couch, trying to process it all. Myra's world was collapsing, and she had no one to blame but herself. But somehow, I still felt this hollow emptiness. Revenge hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't brought back the love we'd lost, or the years we'd spent building a life together. It hadn't healed the wound. I didn't know what was next. I didn't know how to move forward or where to go from here. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her win. And as much as I hated it, the truth was this. This was my redemption too. I had to take it. For myself. For Lucas. For everything she had stolen from us. When Mira left, I thought that would be the end of it. But, as with everything in life, nothing is ever that clean or simple. She wasn't gone for long, at least, not in the ways I needed her to be. While she didn't physically come back to the house, her presence lingered in other ways. There were messages, emails, and the occasional knock at the door. I tried to ignore her, to focus on Lucas and rebuilding my life, but she made it impossible to fully let go. The messages started off apologetic. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she'd write. Or, "I didn't know how to stop myself." Each one felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of the betrayal, and the way she had failed both me and Lucas. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was there left to say? She had chosen her path, and I was trying to find mine. But the messages didn't stop. They shifted, becoming more desperate. "Please, let's talk. I'll explain everything," she begged. "We can fix this." For Lucas. That one hit me harder than the rest. Using Lucas as a reason, as leverage, felt like the lowest blow of all. She had already broken our family, and now she wanted to use the one thing that still mattered to me as a bargaining chip? It was unforgivable. And yet, I still struggled. Not with wanting her back, those feelings were long gone, but with the memories, the good times we had shared before everything fell apart. It was hard to separate the Mira I once knew from the person she had become. The woman I married wasn't this manipulative, lying stranger. At least, that's what I told myself. Maybe I had been blind to her true self all along. I finally agreed to meet her, not for her sake, but for mine. I needed closure. I needed to say the things I'd been holding in since the day I caught her with Ryan. We met at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, worn out, like the weight of everything was finally catching up to her. A small part of me felt pity, but it was overshadowed by the anger that still simmered inside me. "Thanks for meeting me," she said quietly as she sat down. I didn't respond. I just nodded and waited for her to start. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze, before finally speaking. "I know I messed up," she began. "I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I want to try to make things right." "Make things right?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "Mira, you destroyed everything. You didn't just hurt me, you betrayed our entire family. You lied to my face, to Lucas, to everyone." She flinched but didn't interrupt. "I gave you everything," I continued, my voice rising slightly. "I trusted you. I built a life with you, and you threw it all away. For what? For some fling with a guy who won't even stick around now that the truth is out." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You don't get to sit here and play the victim. You made your choices, Mira. And now, you have to live with them." She finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I know, okay? I know I ruined everything. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry." For a moment, I felt a flicker of something. Sympathy, maybe. But it wasn't enough. "I don't want your apology," I said coldly. "I don't need it. What I need is for you to stay away from me. From Lucas. From our lives." Her face crumpled, but I didn't back down. I had spent too much time drowning in the pain she caused. I wasn't going to let her drag me down again. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I felt lighter. It wasn't a happy feeling. There was no joy in any of this, but it was something close to peace. I had said my piece, and now I could finally start to move forward. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Thank you for watching this video to the end. What did you like most about this story? Write your answers in the comments. See you in the next video.